Hello everybody, today we are going over 6 of the worst greenwashing examples in history. Greenwashing is when a company makes itself seem like it's more eco-conscious or eco-friendly than what it really is, whether it's through their policies or products that they're selling or just the branding in general. Anywhere that you go to Walmart or a grocery store, and every single aisle that you walk down, there are examples of greenwashing everywhere. If you don't know what it is yet, you'll get it after this first example. So example number 1, Fiji water. So all the way back in 2011, Fiji was sued for marketing itself as being carbon negative, when in reality, the offset that they were promising to make to become carbon negative weren't going to be realized until 2037. Fiji was calling themselves carbon negative all the way back in 2008, but this wasn't going to take effect for another 29 years in 2037. That's like going to get your oil changed and them giving you a rebate for the oil change, but not telling you that you can't cash that in until 30 years later. And not to mention, Fiji themselves, they constantly make themselves seem like they're, from nature and so pure and so great, which, their water comes from the Fijian aquifer, so Fijian, maybe the J, no, but it's bottled in a diesel-fueled factory. It's put into plastic bottles, and then it's shipped all over the world, pumping CO2 throughout its entire path, getting to you, the customer, who's being scammed for buying it in the first place. Greenwashing example number 2, Amazon. I'm just as shocked as you are to see that Amazon's on this list. Not. So Amazon's been accused of greenwashing on numerous occasions. Let's look at a recent example. So in 2019, the company pledged that they were going to make commitments to have net zero emissions by 2040, but they didn't say how they were going to do it. They didn't have any concrete plan put in place whatsoever. They just said, you know what? I think we're going to be net zero carbon emissions by 2040. Yeah, let's just go ahead and say that. Just to put the cherry on top, Amazon only included its own direct operations in this pledge. They excluded the carbon footprint of its global supply chain, which makes up 75% of its total carbon output. And also something that most people probably don't know, Amazon supplies the AI for companies like BP and Shell. You might have seen this shopping around on Amazon. They have a climate pledge friendly badge that they put on specific items. So you're led to believe that if you're buying an item that has this pledge on it or this sticker on it, that it's an eco-friendly product. But when you dive deeper, it was found that a wide range of completely environmentally unsound products received this climate-friendly badge. Some of the items that were approved were individually packaged teeth whitening strips, which are known to be terrible for the environment, and facial cleansing wipes that were individually packaged. Jeff Bezos himself has been accused of greenwashing. You might remember the $10 billion climate change pledge that he said that he was going to be putting money towards climate change. $10 billion. But he didn't say how he was going to do it or exactly when he was going to do it or basically anything about it other than just flashing $10 billion climate change to everybody. He has started to put some of the money out at this point, but a lot of environmental groups are saying that the money is going towards outdated and market-based strategies that just simply haven't worked this entire time. Yeah, I can see how he could be accused of greenwashing by doing these things. Greenwashing example number 3, sustainable palm oil. So the Roundtable on Sustainable Palm Oil, otherwise known as the RSPO, unites stakeholders from around the world in the palm oil industry, and it's been widely criticized since its creation in 2004 because they make claims that are too generalized, too exaggerated. They've had fraudulent auditing of palm oil plantations. Primary forests are continuing to be cut down under their watch, even though that is something that they've claimed that they were going to stop from happening. They've repeatedly failed to even meet their own standards that they've put out there for people. Palm oil is in everything. Food, soap, literally everything that you can think of has palm oil in it, basically. And so if you're buying these items that have this label on it that claims that it's more sustainable, you are thinking as the consumer that you're being more eco-friendly or more eco-conscious. You're doing something that is better for the environment, spending a little bit more money to do that. And in reality, you're not. Greenwashing example number 4, Nestle. Nestle's on some bullshit. A 2019 class action lawsuit against Nestle alleged that the food giant's sustainably sourced cocoa beans are actually not sustainable whatsoever. The production of the key ingredient in the company's chocolate products, which include things like Butterfinger and Nesquik chocolate, are helping drive massive deforestation in West Africa. And to top things off, it's also claiming that the cacao is coming from farms that use child and slave labor. Way to go, Nestle. Not only has Nestle been accused of greenwashing with their chocolate, but also their water. In fact, they were just recently named in the top 3 plastic polluters in the world for the 3rd year in a row. right alongside Coca-Cola and Pepsi. What a list to be on. Nestle is now saying that they're going to be making all of their plastic packaging 100% recyclable or reusable by 2025. Not from 100% recycled, 100% recyclable by 2025. So that's kind of sounds good, right? Like when you just read that sentence alone and you're ignoring the fact that Nestle is who put us in this problem to begin with. They're slapping a band-aid on something, or they're doing like a little, look over here, we're going to make some of our items more recyclable, while at the same time producing millions and millions and millions of plastic bottles that are just going to sit in the world's oceans and pollute and pump CO2 into the atmosphere. But hey, they're going to be more recyclable in 4 years, maybe. Greenwashing example number 5, Exxon and BP. Exxon and BP. Where do I even... In 1957, ExxonMobil's own scientists knew that the burning of fossil fuels was contributing to rising CO2 levels in the atmosphere. What did they do about it? Nothing. Then more evidence came out in the 70s, a lot more. And what did they do about that? Not only nothing, they did the reverse. They squashed it. They spent hundreds of millions of dollars on anti-climate change campaigns, and they squashed all of that data. So that's a whole other story. There could be novels written about Exxon and BP alone, but let's get into some specific recent examples. Recently, Exxon has said that they are aiming to have the technical ability to produce 10,000 barrels of algae-based biofuel a day by 2025, end quote. But 10,000 barrels, not too bad, right? Sounds good. But what Exxon failed to mention is that this goal only equates to 0.2% of the corporation's current refinery capacity. It also fails to mention how the company itself estimated that by 2024, it would be producing 1 million barrels per day of oil and gas in the Permian Basin of West Texas and New Mexico. That is 5 times more than what they produce today. We're aiming to have the technical ability to have some algae-based oil. Let's look at one more concrete example before we move on to BP. They have Green Mobil 1 motor oil promoting this item, this product heavily that is supposed to increase the fuel efficiency of your car, while at the same time killing federal policy that would have increased car fuel efficiency across the board. They lie, they squash information, and they manipulate. And they have been doing it for 70 years. So now on to BP. Oh, BP. Let's start with some of the more recent news with BP, and then we'll work our way back. So in 2019, environmental lawyers came down hard on BP for making these ridiculous advertisements that had wind turbines in the background with like families playing on a stupid hill or whatever to make them appear like they were making strides towards renewable energy when in fact they weren't at all. They also branded themselves in the early 2000s as Beyond Petroleum when they were almost 100% invested in oil and gas, which is petroleum. That's like saying you're beyond human because you're wearing cheetah print. So these things suck, right? But let's look at BP's most egregious example of greenwashing, and this was back in the 2000s as well. Have you ever heard of the term carbon footprint? Anyway, BP came up with that, or I should say BP's ad team came up with that. They had this big ad campaign where they would walk around on the streets and ask people if they knew what their carbon footprint is. Then they would publicly shame people and say, oh, wow, look at your carbon footprint.
It's pretty high. Maybe you should do something to lower that.
While at the same time, they were creating the problem behind the scenes to begin with. It's brilliant marketing, if you're going to look at it from that standpoint. Shitty marketing, but brilliant. So a huge amount of individuals still think that individuals are to blame and the problem lies solely with us and we dug ourselves in this hole and we can dig ourselves out, and that's just not true. Hate to tell you. It's gross, and that's what they do. And for our last example of greenwashing, let's look at H&M. So H&M, best known for making incredibly cheap, crappy clothes at an incredibly low price. The main problem with them is that they claim that they're going to start making products out of some sustainable or recycled items. But the problem is the sheer amount of incredibly cheap clothes that H&M just continues to pump out through their fast fashion practices. They're creating way too much of a problem that this, making just a few of their items out of some recycled material is going to help. It's not really going to make a dent in the process at all. It also came out that H&M supplier factories don't earn enough money to make a living wage. They've fainted from exhaustion, and they face repercussions for union organizing. What a great company. I was duped by them. In one of my early videos, one of my Good News Friday videos, I featured the Loop, which is this thing that they've created to where you can bring in some clothes from H&M and you can recycle them in their stores, and then they'll make upcycled products out of it. But it has come out that they produce 500 million garments a year, and only 0.7% of them are recycled. So a lot of these clothes that you bring in as a customer or as a consumer and you think you're bringing them in to be recycled are actually shipped overseas to places like Kenya where they overwhelm landfills. So what happens when they overwhelm landfills is that they're just burned and they release all those crappy fabrics and toxins in the air and locals are forced to breathe it. And it's only a teeny tiny fraction that's actually resold. So like you think as a customer that you are doing something great by buying from H&M and then you can just bring them back in and recycle them, but that's not what you're doing. So we all fall victim to greenwashing. I've fallen victim to greenwashing. I just did a video on Tide Pure Clean and I didn't know until after I was done with the video that they are facing a class action lawsuit for greenwashing. So I have a big disclaimer on my Tide Pure Clean video. It's really hard. The best thing that you can do is do your research. Figure out what brands aren't greenwashing and what brands actually are sustainable and go with those and just ignore the rest of the noise. That's the best advice that I have for you on this. Thanks for watching. I appreciate it. And I'll see you in my next video, I hope.